No doubt a topic that is close to many, many people's hearts. I want to touch upon it tonight mainly, not to dwell on the pain and to dwell on the reasons for the estrangement, but maybe to dwell more on the tools to cope with the estrangement of family members, and maybe even to try and reconcile with them based on what Judaism teaches us. I am no clinical psychologist, and I will not speak, therefore, about psychological tools. All I can do is share with you the wisdom of Judaism, of its sages, of its Kabbalists, and of its many, many scriptures that have no doubt a lot to say about this topic. I want to begin just with the story of this man this woman who went up to the heavens after 120 years, and the lobby of the heavens is busy, and then all of a sudden an angel approaches her and says, "Oh, you're next. Fine. Can I go to the Garden of Eden?" "No. There's a test you have to pass first. If you pass this test, you're welcome to paradise." "No problem. What's the test?" The angel says, "Look, it's a spelling test. And today, luckily, we have an easy word. If you know how to spell the word love, then you're welcome to come in." She says, "I was always very good in spelling. Of course, love, L-O-V-E." The angel says, "Welcome to paradise." A few days later, the same angel comes back to her and says to her, "You had said that you were good at spelling. Look, I need to go somewhere else. Do you mind substituting me for just a little bit? Whoever comes, you can pick the word of your choice, and you'll have to ask them to spell it. If they can spell it right, you admit them to the heavens, just as we did with you." She says, "Fine, no problem." She goes and subs the angel, and lo and behold, who comes? Her ex-husband. Ex-husband that she was estranged from for a long time. She says to him, "Look, the rules are pretty clear. The angel instructed me to ask people if they can spell some words. If you can spell the word of my choice, you'll be welcome to paradise." The man says, "Well, I was always very good at spelling. What's the spelling word for the day?" The woman thinks a little bit, and she says to him, "Czechoslovakia." Does anyone know how to spell that year? Yeah, good. Czechoslovakia. But friends, speaking of estrangement, indeed, we have family members. Sometimes it's our exes, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's our siblings, our parents that we're estranged from. And all we think of is, how can we get back to them? How can we give them a spelling word that is a little too difficult to show them what shame truly means? But today, again, I want to focus more on the tools on how to cope and how to perhaps reconcile with those members that we may be estranged from. And the first and foremost tool is a tool that comes directly from the Torah itself, from the 5 books of Moses, in which we are told in Leviticus 19:15, and I'm sure you all have the references in front of you. I don't know if we're going to read each and every one of them, but that verse tells us that with justice you should judge your fellow. Now, this typically refers to judges of courts, but the Talmud adds another layer to this verse. And it says that no, it does not just relate to judges in the courthouse, but it also relates to each and every one of us. That when it comes to judging others, then we should do so always on the side of merit. Why? Because you never know. You never know where the person is coming from when he transgressed that transgression, when he harmed that person, when he insulted you or someone else. You never know. And if we were to really know, then maybe we would be a little bit more forgiving. Maybe we would judge indeed to the side of merit. This is why the Mishnah that speaks quite extensively about this approach says that when we see people, we should see them as kol ha'adam, which is referenced here number 3. Kol ha'adam, the entire human being. Don't look at just one part of the human being. Don't look at just the insult, for example, but look at the entire human being. If you were to look at the entire human being, his past, his present, his future, his skills, his weaknesses, his strengths, his talents, whatever it is that that human being encompasses, you may judge him differently before jumping to conclusions. I'll never forget how, as a young teenager, I was 16 years old, and I've told this story in the past, but I remember walking into a Jerusalem synagogue late in the afternoon, looking for a mincha prayer with a minyan, an afternoon prayer, and someone guided me to a synagogue I've never been to before. It was in a small alley. You know, the avenues of Jerusalem are very narrow, and I walk into the synagogue, and I'm finally settled with the Siddur. I'm ready to begin the prayer with the minyan, with the assembly of people who were there. And all of a sudden, a man walks in with 4 of his children. I'll never forget them. And these children were the wildest children I've ever seen. Now, I have 10 children. I can tell you, I know what wild children are. But these were even wilder than my children, which is unfathomable. But I am there trying to pray and concentrate, and they're running around, and they're taking the prayer holders, if you know what I'm referring to, and smashing them on the walls that they were hanging from. They were doing all sorts of noises, and I'm saying to myself, gosh, can't he control his kids? And if he can't, why bring them in the first place? Leave us alone. We came here to pray. We came here to be in a meditative state, to be able to really be in sync with ourselves and with God. Leave us alone. And I was judging this person and his kids for about 15, 20 minutes until the end of the mincha prayer, the afternoon prayer, when the mourner's Kaddish is recited. All of a sudden, then this father tells his children, come, we have to say the mourner's prayer for mommy. And I said to myself, how dare I judge this man and his children? They just lost their mother. They sang Kaddish for their mother. If I had known that, I would have been able to pray regularly, maybe with even more concentration and with even more love for them. But you never know. And that was a day that stands frozen in time in my own memory lane. Because indeed, it taught me the lesson that you never know. We so often jump to conclusion. We simply don't know where the person is coming from. When I became a rabbi, my beloved mentor, Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, Evan Israel of blessed memory, who passed away about 1.5 years ago, gave me one of the great lessons I've ever received about being a leader, being a rabbi, being somewhat of a spiritual guide. Not that I call myself that, I'm far from that, but trying to be. And I came to him with the diploma, the rabbinic diploma that was still fresh. And I said to him, so, okay, I'm so proud to show you my Rabbinic Ordination. What is this all about? And he answered in a way that only he could answer. And he said to me, look, this means that you're a rabbi, and this means that people will come to you with all sorts of questions. But your role as a rabbi, and I believe that that's the role of every human being, when you are addressed with questions, or when you are addressed with opposition, and even more so, when you are addressed with controversy, your role as a rabbi is not to answer the question. It's to answer the question behind the question. And he explained that many people will only say what they want to say because they're really ashamed to say what they truly want to say. So they present a question, but it's really a mask to something that's much greater. In English, I know there's an expression that says, don't answer the question, answer the person. You have to look at the person. And I think it's true not just for questions, I think it's true for judging. We never know. Now, I know sometimes we have a family member that hurt us profoundly. But one of the ways to cope with this is indeed to tell ourselves, we don't know. We don't know what's going through his head, through his heart, through his soul. We just don't know. And therefore, we'll judge them on the side of merit. Now, I know there are exceptions which we'll speak about. Sometimes the behavior is so harmful that it's better indeed to distance ourselves from that behavior and from that person altogether. And we can speak about this towards the end, especially during our Q&A. But in general, we should never jump to judgment, never jump to conclusion, because again, we never know. The entirety of the person remains somewhat concealed from us. And that's tool number 1. I want to conclude this tool number 1 with, I think it's worth reading this reference, the 4th reference here, that speaks about yet another more mystical layer, about judging people negatively. Does anyone want to read? I shouldn't be the only one speaking tonight, so maybe someone wants to read here the last reference of step 1, or number 5, from the top of the first page. Anyone? Right, and this comes from Rabbi Schneerson of blessed memory in one of his books on the portion Likutei Sichot. But it's so true, you know, that people say that hatred hurts the hater the most, more than the person that you hate. I was raised in South Africa, and I'll never forget when Nelson Mandela came out of jail on February 11, 1990, at the end of this long day parading the streets and celebrating his freedom, he was asked by a journalist, and I wrote about this just last week, he was asked by a journalist, do you not hold any resentment for the people who tortured you for 27 years in Robben Island, where you were in complete isolation in this prison with subpar conditions? Do you not hold any resentment, any grudges towards those people? And he responded so brilliantly, became a line that he became famous for. And he said, resentment is like drinking poison and hoping that your enemy will die from it. Again, I repeat, resentment is like drinking poison and hoping that your enemy will die from it. Instead of, you think you're feeding your enemy that poison because you're angry and then anger is felt by him and he's ashamed. No. At the end of the day, you're drinking that poison because hatred, again, hurts the hater the most. Negativity contaminates the mind, as Rabbi Schneerson says here. And the more we can let go of that negativity and start looking at the other with a positive eye, with a positive judgment, as mentioned, then the more our mind itself can be pure and can, in a way, start to heal. This is what Mandela taught. This is what Rabbi Schneerson taught. I think it's true also from the other side, from the other perspective. The more we fill our mind with positivity, the more our mind is healthy. And the more, therefore, our life, I think, is happy and positive. The more we fill it with negativity, then the opposite happens. I really believe in that. I know that more and more science even speaks about that, not just, metaphysical science, but physical science speaks about how positive thinking really can affect a person's health, not just state of mind, but state of health, physical health. And the more we think positively, the more it can heal us. And that's true, again, because of what the Rabbi Schneerson is saying here, that at the end of the day, hatred hurts the hater the most, and love benefits the lover the most. That's just the simple fact of life. So when we judge others, let us also think of that mystical dimension, because at the end of the day, the way we think of others is going to affect us whether we want it or not. Step number 2, being like a reed. That's yet another tool. Tonight, I'll speak about 4 different tools, but that's yet another tool provided by Judaism, and this comes also from the Talmud. Let's read this reference too. I think it's worth reading. Does anyone want to read here the bottom reference of the first sheet? The rabbis taught. Right. I think it's a beautiful metaphor between the reed and the cedar tree. Cedar trees appear so beautiful, so strong, but when a storm comes, they fall. The reeds, or bamboo sticks, are so steeply rooted that although they do not appear as majestic as cedar trees do, but when a storm comes, they know how to flex themselves and rely on their deep roots, on their deeper self, so to speak. And because of that, they do not fall apart during storms, even the strongest of all. Even hurricanes, by the way, and that's statistically also proven. Now, the metaphor here, I think, is very powerful because it speaks of 2 other tools, with 2 other tools that can be also included in this umbrella tool of being flexible. Tool number 1 is that you have to be steeped in yourself. Just like those reeds that are steeped in deep roots. You have to be steeped in yourself, in your values, in your soul, in knowing who you are. Not just as a bodily being, but as a divine being. Not just as a person that has a business card, but also as a person that has a life card, as I call it. Someone that knows how to live, not just exist by working, but truly live with values, live with principles. That's number 1. And number 2, it also speaks of this idea that one needs to know how to be flexible from time to time, how to prioritize life, and to know that some things are simply not worth fighting for or fighting over. My beloved rabbi, again, going back to Rabbi Steiners, would often say that the difference between a wise person and a fool is very simple. A wise man makes the important important and the trivial trivial. A fool makes the important trivial and the trivial important. And that's not being flexible. When you take something so trivial and you make it so important, you make a big fight out of it. Really? Is that what life is about? Is that being a reed? I will tell you this. I was struck by an article I read maybe some 15 years ago article in The Guardian, which is a famous newspaper in Great Britain. But it was written by a nurse that attended the dying for about 30 years. And I think she eventually wrote a book about it. Her name is Bonnie Ware. And she wrote the top 5 regrets of the dying person. That was the name of the article. I'm sure you can Google it and find it. And what's amazing to me is that the number 1 regret, maybe you can guess, the number 1 regret was not what we're speaking about. Number 1, maybe it is actually what we're speaking about a little bit. The number 1 regret was people saying that they weren't true to themselves. They cared too much about other people's opinions. The number 2 regret, guess? Come on. What? Reconciliation, fine. Or work too much, right, exactly. That they did not prioritize their family over their work. Now, I can tell you this, ever since I read this article, and unfortunately as a rabbi I see many dying people, including just a few days ago, and I try to ask that question, if it's fitting, of course, if it's tactful, and if it's meaningful. And I asked that question to the dying, and she's not wrong. Bonnie Ware was not wrong. It's true. Most of the regrets of the dying people are number 1, that they weren't true to themselves, and therefore they didn't have values really that they were steeped in, and they fell in the storms of life because they had no anchor. And number 2, they didn't prioritize family, prioritize what the important things in life. And that is something that very often people realize when it's a little bit too late. But if only we can live a life in which the priorities are straight, and we are indeed steeped in our values, and develop our souls, and nurture our souls, and know that there's so much to life, so much more to life than the hurts caused by others, then no doubt that tool in and of itself can help us also overcome all sorts of estrangements. You know that as children, we are quite different than adults when it comes to estrangement, when it comes to fighting. And the big question is, why is it that children can fight and 5 minutes later, they're best friends again, while adults can fight and 5 minutes later, 5 months later, 5 years later, they're still fighting? Does anyone know? I think that's because children have their priorities straight. Children prefer being happy over being right. Adults prefer being right over being happy. And that's not a right priority to have. Sometimes happiness is a far better priority than being right, than knowing that, I at least have the truth. That's not the right priority to have again. The wise makes the important important, and the trivial trivial. Speaking of my rabbi, and you'll hear me mention him many times, as I was very, very connected to him, but not too long ago, and I would suggest that people, I've taken that upon myself when this was discovered, but not too long ago, he passed, and about a month or 2 after he passed, they discovered many, many manuscripts that he wrote. He was a big author. Many of them haven't been published, but one of those manuscripts was a prayer that he wrote at the age of 20. You see, as his students, he would tell us to author our own prayers, to read not just the text, but to also have our own text in which we can express ourselves best to God. And he would do that himself. He would write his own prayers too. Now, a prayer that he authored was discovered when he was 20, and the opening paragraph of that prayer is a paragraph that spoke volumes about who he was and about this very topic. And he asked God, please, God, merit me to not be enmeshed in the trivialities of life. I'm quoting almost verbatim. Not to be enmeshed in the trivialities of life, and to remember that that which is important should be made important. I pray that prayer every morning, and I hope that it helps me prioritize indeed what is important and what is trivial. That, I think, is tool number 2 that is so crucial. Sometimes we become estranged because we fight over petty things. But if we knew that sometimes being happy is more important than being right, then maybe we wouldn't fight over those little trivialities of life. Now that's tool number 2. I'm going to skip the next reference because it echoes the story of the cedar and the reed. Let's go to tool number 3, focusing forward. Does anyone want to read the first reference here, which is one of my favorite verses in the entire Bible? It comes from the book of Proverbs, authored by King Solomon, He was also known as the wisest of all. Does anyone want to read? Yeah, this verse. Proverbs 26:4. Anyone? Right. Did not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like him. In other words, take the high road, as they would say. Don't go down to that person's level, because you'll become a fool by doing so. Again, my beloved rabbi would say that sometimes when you're splashed with mud, it's what some people do. If you've ever felt that splash of mud, not physical mud, emotional mud, psychological mud, spiritual mud, the best thing to do is to run away, not to play with the mud, because you'll get dirtier. So don't go back to the guy who's muddy and start fighting with him. You'll just get dirtier. What's the point? Focus forward. And that's tool number 3. Sometimes all we can do about estrangement is not to focus on the past. It's to focus forward, focus on our lives, focus indeed on filling our lives with values, and the past will take care of itself by itself. At least we hope so. But if we go down and play with the guy with the mud, then we'll only get dirtier. I think this is also why God created sleep. Why did God create sleep? I've always had that question, because just imagine, if God did not create sleep, we could be so much more productive, right? We would have an extra 6, 7, 8 hours, depending on how long you sleep at night, every single day. So why did God create sleep? What's the point? But I think God created sleep for a simple reason, so that we can reboot our system each and every day. Imagine, if we didn't sleep, the fight that I just had, if I had a fight, would linger on, not to the next hour, and to the next hour, to the next hour, to that. Going to sleep enables my system to be completely rebooted, and then wake up in the morning with fresh new eyes, with a fresh new reality, or with a fresh new self. And that's why God created sleep. Now, what is the message, therefore, of sleep? The message of sleep is what we're speaking about. Sometimes we have to let yesterday be yesterday. Focus on today. Focus on yourself today. Focus on the blessings today. Focus on the opportunities of today. And focus on everything that is good about today. Whatever was yesterday was yesterday. Let bygones be bygones. We say that each and every day. When we say the morning prayers in Judaism, we speak about how God refreshed us. That's almost a literal translation. He refreshed us, or renewed us, reinvigorated us. With that reinvigoration, now we can face the world anew with fresh eyes too. I think that's yet another tool. And sometimes, yes, we've tried to make up with people. Sometimes people have hurt us, and we've done everything in our power to reconcile, but things don't work out. Peace simply can't reign. So what do? Are you going to be occupied by that 24/7? Move forward. Focus onwards. I think that's one of the great tools. And I say that, by the way, to my children all the time. Not that they fight too much, but they fight, and then, right, they have their priorities straight. They choose being happy over being right. But sometimes things linger on, whether it's fighting or other things. And I just say to them, well, because you were now thinking about the past, you missed what just happened this minute. And this minute will never come back to you. So focus on the opportunity of the minute. It's such a pity. God is giving you a gift, and you're completely ignoring it. And I tell them, imagine, I would come and give you a beautiful Hanukkah gift, and you would completely ignore it. Why? Because you're upset at someone, and you don't even notice the gift. Wouldn't that be such a pity? But that's what's happening every day. God is giving us a new day, and we're speaking about the past instead of speaking about the present. One of the great poets in Jewish history was a man named Avram ibn Ezra, who, by the way, if we're speaking about estrangement, and if we're speaking about pain and suffering, the man was quite estranged from many, not in his family, but many others in his close circles. He was exiled from country to country. He lived in the 13th century, in which Jews were persecuted quite heavily in Europe. And he ended up, he moved from Italy to Spain, to England, to France. He was poor to the point that he spent days and days starving. He didn't have any money to buy bread. So this is a man who suffered quite a bit. But this is what he wrote in one of his poems. This is one of my favorite poems too. It's the second reference towards from the bottom of the page. Avram ibn Ezra. Does anyone want to read this poem? The past is gone. Anyone? Everyone's quiet today. Please. Right. The present is like a blink of an eye, so don't let it go to waste. Past and future is yet. By the way, I think this is true also in general in the way we live in this culture in particular. Very people rarely live in the present. Think about this. When you go to school, they tell you better have good grades so that you can go to a good college. When you finally get to college, they tell you better get good grades so that you can get a good first job. When you finally get that good first job, they say to you, you better work very well so that you can get a good promotion. Then you finally get that promotion, say, well, you better work well so you become the CEO of the company. If you become the CEO of the company, now you better work very well so you can retire well and rest. And then at the age of 75, you look back and you say to yourself, whoa, where did life go? I was always preparing for the next moment that I don't even enjoy and really relish the opportunities and the blessings of the present. It's the way we view life, but it's certainly the way we view relationships very often. We judge people by the way they were yesterday, not by the way they are today. Sometimes we judge ourselves like this, which is a terrible thing to do. We can't forgive ourselves by the way we were because of what we did yesterday. But why not live the way we are today, with the way God renewed us today? Do you know that one of the great sayings of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, is that when the evil inclination in us causes us to sin, it's not the sin that the evil inclination wants. He doesn't care about the sin. You know what the evil inclination really wants? That inclination that causes you, it's the aftermath of the sin, the depression that you have from the sin. You living in the past because of the sin. You beating yourself up and not embracing the person you are renewed to be today, right now, at this moment. That's what he relishes. And if we're able to jump out of a sin moment and embrace the future and forget that shell behind, then no doubt we're forgiven already and we're able to live life meaningfully and purposefully. But that's true in relationships in particular. Sometimes all you have to do is jump out of the mud situation, focus forward, and enable your best self, the self of today, the self of now, to emerge. That's tool number 3. I want to get to tool number 4, then open this up to questions because I know you have many. Step number 4, I think, is perhaps the most meaningful one, at least in my eyes. It's a step that I try to use when I face some tension from time to time. And this I learned from Joseph that we read about in these portions, in these very portions. It's no coincidence that we're having this talk tonight when we are reading about Joseph. He takes the center stage of the Torah portions. But Joseph is my favorite biblical character, frankly. Why? One might say that Pinchas, my name is Pinchas, is my favorite biblical character, but it's not even Pinchas, it's Joseph. Why? Because I think Joseph teaches us what life truly means. How so? Joseph is a man who faced the greatest estrangement of all times. Think about this. His own brothers attempted to assassinate him. They threw him in a pit. And then when they saw it wasn't working for them, they took him out of a pit and they sold him to slavery. He finally became a slave in some Egyptian home, and there he was accused of rape. He was completely innocent, but accused of rape. So he ends up in an Egyptian dungeon for a lifetime. He got the life sentence. Miraculously, after 10 years, they were able to take him out of the dungeon to interpret the dreams of Pharaoh the king. He interpreted the dream so brilliantly that Pharaoh took a liking in him, and he said to him, why don't you become the vice king? And many years later, who does he meet? His own brothers, who tried to assassinate him. To make a very long story short, he doesn't hold a grudge. He reveals himself to them, and they become so afraid. They say to themselves, oh, he was estranged from us. Maybe now he'll take his revenge, that he's the all-powerful vice king of Egypt. But instead of that route, Joseph chooses another route. And he says to his brothers, it's such a powerful verse. He says to his brothers, no, you have not sold me into Egypt. It's not that I'm oblivious. Yes, I know you did. You sold me into Egypt. But I don't choose to view my story like that. You did not sell me into Egypt. I was sent here by God to provide for you. And in that short verse that is mentioned right here at the bottom of the page, Joseph is teaching us that there are two ways to live life. You can live life as a passive object. This is sold. This is sold. Even this water bottle here is sold. But they have no say. They're victims. victims of whatever I decide to do with this water bottle, or with this table, or with this mic, or with whatever else I may have. You can decide to live your life as a victim, as a passive, lifeless object. Or you can decide to live your life as an ambassador of God who is sent to every moment and every place to infuse in it divinity, meaning, purpose. And Joseph was saying to his brothers, I am not sold. Yes, you sold me, but I don't view myself as sold. I'm no victim. I was sent here as an ambassador of God. What is an ambassador of God? And here comes tool 4. An ambassador of God is a person who can take the hurts of life and see in them the hand of God. A person who can look at the attempted assassination that he suffered, like Joseph, and say to him, oh, there was a divine reason for why this happened, so that I can provide food for you here in Egypt, as he tells his brothers. I'm neither vice king, I can give you food. So he takes again his terrible past and looks at it with a new light, with a light that says that this terrible past isn't as terrible as I thought. In fact, quite the opposite. It was designed by God to elevate me and to elevate the world through me. That's how Joseph looks at his past. It's a very, very difficult level to reach, obviously. To take the hurts, the insults, and to say, oh, thank you for the insult. Thank you for the hurt. I bless you for it. Because it's meant to be. It's God's sign that there's a blessing in this that will lead me to the promised land, to be able to provide for my family, maybe. Just like Joseph. But I think it's also a very necessary one. As difficult as it is, it's very necessary. There are people who know how to not just tell God how great the problems are, but to tell the problems how great God is. And by telling your problems how great God is, you're able to see that there is a God in those problems that is sending you messages, that is creating those problems to elevate you, to make your life better. You know, I've told the story now multiple times, but as mentioned, I visit the dying quite a bit. Unfortunately, we have someone in our community right now who I visited Mayo, and may God bless him with some of you know him, Barry Cassidy. God, Baruch Ben Sarah. God should bless him with a full and speedy recovery, but he's not doing well. But speaking of that, I remember how a few weeks ago I received a call, and I know some of you have heard the story from me, but I received a call from a Catholic priest. I don't know how he found my number, but he says to me, look, I know you're a rabbi. There's a woman here dying in a hospice in Old Town Scottsdale. Why don't you come and visit her? She wants a visit from a rabbi. Fine. I went and I visited her. Her name is Laura. I speak to her, and she tells me she's a Holocaust survivor. And I said to her, can you please tell me what your story is? She says, look, I'll tell you how it began. And my Holocaust story began. She then goes on to tell me that she was in line at Auschwitz with many other Jews after a long travel in a cattle car with horrific conditions. She lands in Auschwitz with her mother and a baby sister. Her mother was holding a baby sister in her hand. And they are moving forward in this line. And eventually they reach Dr. Mengele, Machshemo. May his name be erased. Joseph Mengele. Joseph Mengele was there with a few other Nazi officers. And one of these Nazi officers approaches her mother and sees her mother with a baby in her arm, Laura's baby sister. And he says to her mother, how dare you bring a baby to Auschwitz? There are no babies at Auschwitz. Don't you know that? And then the Nazi officer takes the baby, and you'll excuse the graphics, he tears the baby away from the arms of the mother, throws the baby in the air, and shoots the baby to death in front of Laura. Laura tells me that when she saw that, right there and then, she decided to make up for the loss of her sister. How so? Not just by having every atom of her being come through in order for her to survive, but also once she survived, she decided to have as many children as possible. Now, you may think she's an ultra-religious woman. She's not at all, at least externally. I believe internally she's very religious. But she decided to have one child after another, and with each child born, she said, you will make up for my sister. You will make up for my sister. How many children does she have today across the globe? 12 children. I thought I had a lot. 12 children. Why? Because she knew that she had to transform the hurts of life into a source of blessing, into the deaths of life into life. And she did so masterfully, so marvelously, so majestically. And it's something that we ought to learn from all of these brave men and women. There are so many people out there who take hurts and wallow in them. But there are such heroes that take these hurts and say, well, I must use them as springboards for growth. That's what Joseph did. That's what we ought to do sometimes within our own families. We're hurt, and I'm not minimizing the hurts. But if we try to reconcile and we still could not, at least we can take these hurts and see the blessings in them, see how they can elevate us, and see how we can transform them. Sometimes it's as small, if we can call it small. I don't think we can measure these things. But as small of an act as taking a hurt like this and say, well, if he was a bad parent to me, I'll at least learn from this and be a good parent to my child, transforming that hurt into a gain. And sometimes it's bigger than that. It's going deep into the hurt and analyzing it and taking every aspect of it and seeing in it, again, a blessing that is waiting to be born. But that's what Joseph demands of us, and this is tool number 4. And I think, friends, that if we can at least internalize these 4 tools and put them into practice. Okay, tool number 1 is not to judge too swiftly because we never know. Tool number 2 is to know how to be flexible and to make the important and trivial trivial. Tool number 3 is to sometimes say to ourselves, stop living in the past. Move forward, embrace the blessing of today and of tomorrow. And tool number 4, transforming the hurts into gains or the tears into triumph, as they say, then no doubt the estrangements that we may be experiencing will become more easy to live with, and they may even become a blessing.